From the ruins of the Greeks and the Romans rose Christianity. Following Christianity, the Renaissance, and the foundations of the Western civilization, which, with its liberation of ideas, comes the liberal philosophy. The enduring ideas of the founding fathers helped shape the start of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, resulting in Western world dominance in the last century. In his book, The Road to Serfdom, Friedrich August von Hayek detailed the rise of Western civilization as a result of liberalism and its impending downfall in the presence of a major threat, socialism. The core of Western civilization, originating from Christianity and developed during the Renaissance, are Western values and the ideas of individualism. Hayek described Western values as independence, self-reliance, individual initiative, and local responsibility, successful reliance on voluntary activity, non-interference with one's neighbor, tolerance of the different and the queer, respect for custom and tradition, and healthy suspicion of power and authority. These values were, back then, core essence that made what was for England and America their national pride and character. Individualism sees the man as only the man, not as a tool or an object needed to propagate a greater cause, but the most supreme being in his own world. The man has the utmost decision-making in how he chooses to live his life. In other words, the man's world is how the man himself sees fit, and not someone else's world where he must live in. The founders of liberalism understood the random and spontaneous nature of society and utilized it in accordance with a way of living that is least affected by coercion. This makes its applications and possibilities infinite, as opposed to the absolute way of the state. Since the dawn of humanity, your life depended on traditions and customs. In some parts of the world, if there is no rain, you sacrifice your baby to your gods. In the series Shogun, even simple things in feudal Japan, such as entering a room, writing on papers, eating, greeting, and even walking requires all these robotic actions that would make it so easy for modern animators to make an NPC replica of. There were strict regulations and restrictions on how women were allowed to move, to perform certain activities, and to even make sound. The growth of civilization resulted from a diminution of the sphere in which an individual is chained by fixed rules such as those in feudal Japan. As civilization advanced, the need to follow rigid structures diminishes, allowing never-before-seen potential unbounded by rituals and customs. The philosophy of individualism is based not so much on whether the individual is egotistical or altruistical, or which one he's supposed to be, but rather that he be allowed to pursue his own individual goals, as it is impossible for him to survey more than a limited field, or more than a limited number of his needs. Whatever his interests may be, whether it's to eat at the most expensive restaurant or to help out his local church, his needs will never affect more than a tiny fraction of the needs of all men. The limits of our imagination makes it impossible to include in our sets of values more than a section of the needs of the whole society. Because there is no complete scales of values, only different sets between different individuals and in different circumstances. And therefore, individualists conclude that they should be allowed within defined limits to follow their own values and preferences rather than somebody else's, as his actions will only affect those within his tiny sphere of existence. That within his own comparatively minute sphere, he should be allowed to subject himself voluntarily to his own system of ends, and not be coerced to someone else's, because to himself the individual's ends are supreme. The essence of individualism suggests that each one of us should be the ultimate judge of our wants and needs, and it should be our own views that govern our actions. Of course, there is no denying of the existence of common social needs in the individualistic world, especially at a time when the combined efforts of men is crucial and vital to the stability of his community, such as wartime. However, it is more commonly agreed that these joint actions should be for the purpose of the state to serve the needs of the individual rather than the opposite of the individual serving the state. A war to protect the sovereignty of a nation from external danger should be distinguished from a war declared by a small number of high-ranking people for some political advantage on behalf of the whole country. And the state should always follow its goal of being that which facilitates each individual accomplishing their different ends. The competitive system, a direct reflection of individualistic values, is the only system where one does not need to depend on the mighty in order to succeed, and where no one is able to stop him from trying. Nothing, apart from the consequences of his own actions, may impede an individual's right to exercise his bodily autonomy, nor confine him to the circumstances compelled to him by his superiors. The power of a multimillionaire over an individual in a competitive system is less than the smallest functionary in a socialist state who controlled if and how an individual may be allowed to work and to even live. The explosion of individual creativity and innovation headed the growth of science across Europe, breaking the chain of what was the majority beliefs on what was right and what was wrong. Knowledge of the universe was available to all. New inventions, no longer suppressed, were opened to those who dared to risk, and soon started replacing the obsolete. Liberation opened the floodgates of human ingenuity. The development was so vigorous that with the rising standards, there were no areas of society in which development were left untouched, no poor that does not and could not deserve aid. No one was left out of this advancement. The entire Western world progressed more in a century than they had in their entire existence. For the first time, humans were able to dare to believe in a sense of power over their fate, in the unchained possibilities of improving their own lot. With each successes of their predecessors, ambitions of the next generations rise. This advancement, however, is being slowly reverted by a unitary economic plan in a socialist state, which intends to restore things back to the way it once was. With unbelievable progress and advances in technology, also came unbelievable wishes and desires. The level of material comfort now reached so high that people were starting to ask and demand an escape from the unpredictability and fluctuations of life, to a guarantee of security regardless of their contribution to society. As a result of advancement and prosperity in a free society, resentment arose by those who failed to receive their equal share of the pie. The random and unpredictable form of market would necessarily result in an unequal distribution of that reward. However, although this development would affect everyone, poor or rich, positively, there has been a belief by some that they deserve the equal amount of outcome compared to others. The nature of life is unfair. This is a harsh reality for some to understand. For example, you can either be one who made millions off of the stock market crash, or one deeply invested who lost everything. You can either be a hawk girl who into the mic and has made millions just from that, or you could be me who wakes up every day to go to work. For socialists, this is unacceptable. The socialists use the term common good when asked about what they serve, as if there is a universal common good that can be acknowledged by every single person. What scale, then, should we use to measure that common good? There are infinite possibilities of things that people would consider good, so how can a single unitary plan bring us calculated happiness? without forcing us to have to change our values to be aligned with the rigid structure proposed. Given that each person has different hierarchy of values, what sort of plan would act as a universal hierarchy for all the possible human values? Even just the thought of this complete made-up ethical code doesn't make sense. Socialist morals are objective, a one-size-fits-all framework with no room for extra interpretation. In socialism, the end justifying the means becomes the absolute goal, as there is nothing above the greater good, and thus all rules and laws must be facilitative of that resolution. There has never been a moral code through which all individual actions regarding their path in life and their choices of occupation should follow, because the majority of human actions exist within the gray zone. A certain option for one person may be deemed wrong and unjust by another. A man may be considered despicable if he refuses to give a baseball he himself caught to a younger kid with less vertical reach and therefore impossible for the kid to stand a chance, although the adult has never caught such ball in his entire life. As you can see, our moral code is full of gaps, but the good thing is that in a free society there's never been a need to think about all of this what ifs, nor was there a need to fill all of that gap. In a socialist society, however, it must be considered before planning an all-complete code. How will you be able to provide an all-inclusive scale of values that can comprehend the infinite variety of different needs of different people, which attach a definite weight to each scarce resource? A socialist government cannot be fettered by the opinions of the population or by the democratic procedure. Their goal is to produce agreement on everything, on the whole direction of the resources of the nation. Therefore, the system which based itself on the majority decision is unsuited. There is absolutely no reason in a socialist state why two particular plans can be preferred equally by different sets of majority views. A single plan is preferred over all other alternatives, however hard the nature of that one plan is to agree on. One might argue, how about we go slow with it and divide the plan into parts which everyone can agree on, and that way we can make the ultimate unitary democratic plan. As good as it may seem, it is impossible for this idea to come to fruition, not only because it would inevitably satisfy no one, but a lot of proposed plans are conflicting views that counteract one another. The vast majority would definitely want a higher income, but what if it comes with a higher unemployment rate? How will an economic planner balance that? In dealing with the plethora of possibilities, the leader has no choice but to impose his own scale of values and preferences on the rest of the nation. He himself gets the final say of what to implement on the people. This fact, one way or another, leads to totalitarianism. Democracy can be a tool by socialists with which their actions can be justified and implemented to the broader community. I mentioned earlier that a society based on central planning cannot be dependent on the majority population agreement. Instead, it is the will of the small minority able to agree among themselves that enacts the drastic changes to a nation. This is a different kind of democracy compared to what was most known at that time in the Western world. One where agreement is reached when and only when there is undisputable evidence of benefit towards the vast majority of the population, with which each individual ends may be allowed to be fulfilled. The democracy of widely accepted liberal creed, in which each man is allowed to follow his own unique direction, allows the scope of such conversations to be drastically reduced to one which would inevitably benefit the rest of the free society. Capitalism, in its truest sense, a competitive system based on free disposal over private property, is the essence of democracy. Only in this system can democracy be practiced. If done in a collectivist country, democracy will destroy itself. The problem with guaranteed income doesn't arise mainly from lack of incentives for people to work. Without choice, it is not possible for people to grasp and appreciate the impact of their choices on society compared to other alternatives, as it does not translate to the rewards they receive. How would a shortage of doctors be transmitted across the economy if all salaries were fixed? What would the incentive to take a particular job over another be? What would call people out for their best if their hard work would be appreciated just the same as the next person? Protection from competition by the support of the state in the form of government workers grants invulnerable immunity and leaves an impossible gap that separates them from those without. Those secured do not need to move an inch for those struggling to find employment. This can be seen in societies where the older workers are entitled to certain levels of income based on their age and time working for the company, and less on their performance. Why would a younger worker in said company want to strive for a better position when the entire culture is against overachievement based on age? By making the state goal superior to all individuals, it only follows that those individuals who pursue advances for the greater good of the state is superior to others who chose to follow otherwise. During Hayek's era, older forms of socialism grew out of a liberal world, and still had some leftovers of the democratic principle. Unfortunately, National Socialism and Fascism accepted the fact that democratic and international socialism was incompatible. They grew out of a world already dominated by socialist policies and realized the fallacy of a democratic procedure in solving problems evoked by planning. They do not believe in equality as a way out of said problems. What they believe was that their appeal to the groups formerly taken advantage of by particular classes, such as the Jews, whereby they were used as a tool propagating the advancement of those classes, the Jews, whilst being denied equality they were promised, would gain support through promising those people hurt by previous lies with new lies pertaining to give them more power and privileges that they deserve, inevitably creating a hierarchical society where one is treated with less value than the other. The Nazis used this tactic as it is easier to band people together on a negative view than a positive one. They did this successfully against the Jews in order to gain support from the masses. The successful race who came from nothing ended up suffering even after all of their hard work and condemned to lower positions in crafts than their peers. I'm sure you've heard the rest. It is easier to construe agreement based on hatred than actual helpful change, and therefore this form of manipulation is more commonly and successfully mobilized, playing out the rest of the 20th century. Now, a strong counterpoint of the enemies of the West is how individualism is and breeds selfishness and egotism. Hayek would argue that only our choice to undertake personal responsibility dictates our morality. You cannot be self-sacrificing if you are forced to do so under punitive action. Only by following your ultimate goals and values, whilst being aware of the possible alternatives of actions you are able to take, can your decision to act have moral value. Morality exists only when there is freedom of conscience and freedom to choose and act without compulsion, knowing that we are completely responsible for the consequences. A movement that antagonizes such freedom must be anti-moral. In hopes of salvation by the state, we ended up giving up our freedom to make our own decisions. We rely on the state for solving inequalities and inequities. We become more tolerant towards abuses on certain groups of people, all while focusing only on the greater good.